you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. I'm Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and joining me once again is the centrifugal Ian Hardingham.
Hello, isn't it sad that I'm stuck on the lowest possible graphics settings that one could possibly have for a human? It's very sad.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's the top story.
Sony's new and improved PlayStation 4, provisionally entitled the PS4K, is looking more and more likely. Digital Foundry have posited 3 potential forms the upgraded console could take. What's your take on the PS4K?
This is a big deal. As we said on the last show that we did, we're still getting through some older items as we try to get back to our weekly schedule. So I know this is pretty much an old story, but definitely worth talking about. Wow. You know, this is the first time I think that we've seen a real sign that a console is going to start doing intermediate updates routinely that will definitely have some backwards compatibility problems. Now, the 3DS did this. I think that's the only other major console I can think of that has had a new version which has sort of really killed backwards compatibility for a lot of games. There are lots of different reasons this could possibly be. The Forerunner, I think everyone thinks that Sony have decided the PlayStation 4 itself is not powerful enough to run the VR experience they want. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, backwards compatibility is kind of the main potential issue here. I would be surprised if they went for something that wasn't at least nominally backwards compatible, but also, I mean, I think the PS4's graphics hardware is certainly showing its age with some titles now, and obviously VR is a big kicker there. So I think if handled correctly, it could be a good move for them. I mean, personally, I would certainly upgrade to a more powerful PS4 if there were no real downsides to that. But do you think it's inevitable that there will be some?
Yeah, just to be clear, the new PlayStation 4s will definitely have 100% backwards compatibility with existing titles. I'm sure that they wouldn't change that. The question is whether all new games will be playable on an old PlayStation 4, which they almost certainly won't be. I have another lens on this as well. I think that previous generations, companies have sold the same consoles every year for a smaller price. Often introducing smaller versions, but basically always making the price lower every single year. And I think they still want to be able to do that. They still want to be able to target a market segment that they haven't managed to get before by having a PlayStation 4 that's at £200, for instance. But they also want to get people who are willing to pay the amount of money for a new console, a good new console, which is about £350, because those people are in the market every single year. Yeah. And just like mobile phones, they want to have a product that's at that price. And I think having a development cycle that's a bit like a mobile phone's is good for business as well. So I definitely see it happening. I think it's, I'm not someone who has a problem with upgrading my PlayStation 4 every 3 years. So it's not going to really affect me. But I think there are a lot of people, certainly younger people who can't afford to get a new console every 3 years, who will be upset when the next version of Call of Duty, doesn't run very well on their original hardware.
You have to be really careful with that, because you don't want to feel like someone making the choice to buy one of those consoles is a huge deal. You don't want to undermine that choice for, as you say, the very real market segment who always want the newer thing and will happily come with you on the upgrade train. So that must be a really difficult decision to make if you're a platform holder in order to balance out those two forces. I mean, like I say, when I heard this was announced, I was actually just sort of happy and excited about it. Like I thought, oh hey, it'll be interesting to kind of to upgrade my PS4. I can imagine some of the new games that I've seen at E3 press conferences and stuff. They would need a more powerful one. So yeah, I'm kind of down with this.
I think if it wasn't for VR, I really buy into the storyline that this is happening primarily because they really need some extra power for VR. I really buy into that. It's not 100% necessarily true, but it's kind of the thing that I'm taking for granted. If it wasn't for VR, this would be a bit more of a tough ask for them, a bit more of a tough situation. I think the PlayStation 4 and to a slightly lesser extent the Xbox One, they're pretty powerful consoles. I think the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 showed that you can just about wring enough power from a console to stay up to date without having to run two different screens at 90 frames per second or however VR actually works. But in this day of mobile phones, and kind of with the 3DS having sort of soft done this, it just definitely doesn't feel surprising, and it doesn't feel completely violating.
No, and also it makes so much sense that consolidation is what they want to do now. They don't want to trigger a new generation. So the way of kind of really guaranteeing that you're deferring that is to do this incremental thing.
Yeah, I think developers will be pretty much just over the moon about this, because developers hate new console generations, publishers hate them. They have to make this really annoying decision about whether they make a game for an old piece of hardware that's going to look bad in comparison to other games but has an install base of 200 million, or whether they take a bit of first-party funding and make a game for a platform that's only got an install base of 10 million. It's really a tough time when the console generations shift. It's a really, really difficult time for everyone in the industry. So putting that off for a longer time is definitely a good thing in general. I'll be interested to see what this is. Microsoft have kind of really subtly leaked that they're doing the same. In a really ridiculous way. Some artists leaked photo on his Instagram or something that was very silly. So they're both going to do it. It's interesting in some ways because this will remove one of Sony's big advantages, because I don't think that the next Xbox One is going to have the same problems in terms of being less powerful than the new PlayStation. Microsoft are no way going to let that happen.
Yeah. And the VR aspect is interesting here. I've not tried PS VR, but I thought about getting a Vive, and I feel like console is the platform where I'm going to get VR if I'm going to get it, because it's just going to be so much easier to use. And I'm not, I read John Walker's incredible, absolutely the most grumpy thing he's ever written, and that's an achievement for him, about trying to set up the Vive. And for once, I agreed with him. I thought, that sounds terrible, I'm not going to do that. So as much as I'd love to try that, I think PSVR might be my first VR platform, and I really badly want it to be great. Whether it can compete with Oculus, which is the one I've got the most experience with, I don't know. I'm really interested to try it, so I could totally see myself, getting the new PlayStation and getting on board with PSVR.
Maybe this is how they make PSVR a really sort of good product proposition, by bundling it with the PS4K. They can charge £550 for this. It makes a lot more sense actually than spending £800 on a Vive, because you have to have a computer as well, a pretty beefy one. The just to shift very slightly to that, the sort of the negative feedback on the Vive took me by surprise. There was so much positivity surrounding it when it was in beta. But it seems that the size of the room you need and the setup you need to do to get it working has really taken some people by surprise. So the Oculus, which looked to be sort of way behind before this proper retail release of the two platforms, seems to have made some progress.
So apparently there's this thing that Oculus can basically do all of the stuff the Vive can do now. So it can do room scale, and it has these controllers that are really good. But they just didn't foreground that because they didn't think it would be relevant to most people. So there's this combination of I think Valve kind of got it all ready to go and had good content on it and had the tech in place earlier. But Oculus now has the tech, and it's just a really interesting thing. If that was genuinely a marketing decision, I guess it must have gone Valve's way. You'd have to sort of call that one for Valve. But I just find that really fascinating.
Yeah, apparently they have very different sort of official content right now. Yeah, I was reading a big roundup, and the Oculus Rift stuff is a bit more polished, a bit more kind of small scale VR centric stuff, whereas Vive's is a bit more experimental and exciting. So they're kind of they are actually like two different consoles right now, which is really interesting. It's not something I'd seen coming, that's what it was going to feel like.
No, No, I think it's really cool, actually. And Sony is really the dark horse in this. And I want to, they had a lot of PSVR demos at Rezzed where we were recently and people saying very positive things. And I didn't get the chance to go in there, sadly. But I feel like we're into this nice, sort of interesting second stage of this VR stuff now where you're right, it's like a platform war. There's a genuine platform war happening again. And that's really cool.
Yeah, let's see where it goes.
YouTube channel The Low Spec Gamer is dedicated to showing off games at their lowest possible graphics settings and also how to run games on machines that don't normally meet the minimum specification. This has provoked ire from some who claim that it shows a lack of respect for the developer's creative vision. What do you think about the lowest possible graphics?
This is great. I've always really enjoyed taking games and putting them on the lowest res settings because they usually look really weird. Especially in the olden days when you could run games at 320 by 240. They look incredibly cool and pixelated. A lot of the screenshots on this article is especially one of Oblivion, which looks like it's from some experimental first-person shooter from 1997. I really, really like this. This is like a different way of viewing games. Obviously, it's got a functional thing as well, in that some people running really bad computers can play these games. But it just tends to make stuff that looks really, really interesting.
Right, there's definitely an attraction in the aesthetic of sort of functionality, the most basic way you can possibly represent something. Also, this kind of reminded me a lot of something we talked about before with competitive games. A lot of people play them on minimum graphics, and that kind of becomes how you're used to seeing the game. So it's so weird playing something like StarCraft on Ultra when you've been playing on low graphics the whole time. I think this kind of stuff as an aesthetic choice, aesthetic minimalism and sort of retroism is a known thing. So it's just good. I support it.
It tends to really cut down to the more functional aspects of games as well. The stuff that you're seeing is often closer to what's important to the gameplay when you turn off a lot of the graphical fripperies that are completely irrelevant to what you're actually doing in the game. And that's something I really like from a purely aesthetic perspective, seeing what the game's actually about. And it makes everything look more janky and experimental. So I like this.
Excellent. More of this. Nintendo recently launched Miitomo, and you couldn't have been on Twitter in the last 3 weeks without realizing that. The Me-focused social networking app for smartphones. Do you think that Miitomo actually is contributing anything genuinely new or useful?
So this is another story that we're late to the party on, but actually it's really helping us here because Miitomo was like a massive fad for about a week, and it's really got less big now. Like it's gone up and down very quickly.
Yeah.
It seemed, I think the first important thing to say about this is that Nintendo really nailed their first cross-platform thing. Their first non-first-party hardware thing. This was very popular in I think, of a really, really legitimate way. It's kind of got the family-oriented aspect of Nintendo. Like, it's trying to find a way of making photo sharing not just about dicks and balls. It's just another example of Nintendo nailing something. So that's like my first observation of this.
Yeah. I know that certainly in the UK, Nintendo were pretty happy with how it was doing. I talked to a member of their community team. He was saying, just the amount of stuff that people were doing in Miitomo was sort of really caught them by surprise. But I think there's a problem here, and I'm going to call it the alpha bear problem, which is you make one thing that just becomes a massive sort of instantaneous Twitter or other social network hit. And then you really struggle to know why that was, to repeat it, to do anything good associated with that, and then sort of capitalize on it. And I feel like what I really want is a social network that's going to come and take away Facebook or is going to do something genuinely new. And Miitomo feels more like a novelty toy thing, which I'm sure is cool for them, but it doesn't seem to have any long-term implications.
Yeah, it is just a toy. I mean, when Nintendo announced they were making games for phones, this is not what people were expecting.
Yeah.
They were thinking there was going to be a Mario on the phones, which I'm sure there will be eventually. It's a silly little thing. It's very disposable, but it's sort of hard to think that it could have been any more successful in a lot of ways, really. It's tough to say it's disruptive in any way.
Yeah.
Just extremely popular. I don't know what this says about their strategy going forward. I don't know if they're going to try and make a range of novelties like this, or whether the next thing is like a version of Wii Golf. I just don't know. It'll be interesting to see. But, for all of the fanfare about what it would mean the first time Nintendo are making games for other people's platforms, it being this is just a bit weird.
Yeah, and also they seem to have this really huge ongoing desire to have these, these Mii social spaces like they do on the Wii U. You have that crazy thing where the interface is just this giant crowd of Miis, and it's sort of they love Miis, and will I don't know if they'll ever leave Miis alone.
Miis are not my deal, but
No.
Nintendo do seem to think they're very important.
They really love Miis. That's it. That's my comment. A new expansion for the nearly 18 years old Baldur's Gate has added a controversial story mode, which makes it apparently impossible to die in combat. Some people are angry about that because they think it represents the weak nature of kids today who aren't prepared to put up with real man's combat, as it were. I'm paraphrasing there, but that's basically it. What do you think about this? Should games have story modes?
This is pretty weird. This is a very long article, and Richard Cobbett goes a lot of different directions with this. I don't really buy this so-called story mode, which is it's just indistinguishable from an invincibility cheat, basically.
Yep.
I don't buy it as being another difficulty mode. I just don't think that makes any sense. I think it is like a cheat. Cheats have often been sort of formalized as in something that you can select in a game. They haven't always been clandestine things you have to type into a console or with a weird set of joypad commands. So it's not unheard of. I think it's interesting. I'm trying to work out whether, if I was going to play Baldur's Gate, I don't think I'd be able to read all of the text.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I definitely wouldn't be able to spend 100 hours leveling up my party and everything. So I think it's a bit weird. I'm not sure it says very much outside of being like a cool, interesting feature for an old game.
Right, yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think it really has these bigger implications. I'm also fine with, I kind of agree with Richard Cobbett, which is something I find myself saying more as the years roll on, which is that there are games, like Dark Souls, where it would be a travesty if there was an easy mode. That game is so predicated on being this monolithic, sort of incredibly difficult thing. You wouldn't want that. Whereas in other games, I think it's fine to let people play around with this stuff, and if it's what the developer wants to do. Increasingly, and we're going to talk about this more with a later topic, I really think that this is about developer choice. It's not about players having the expectation or feeling like they're owed a certain set of things. It's about developer choice, and I think that's an important thing to bear in mind.
Yeah, in these games, the combat's kind of a filler. It's like when you have a 24-episode series of Buffy, there's a lot of filler. And actually, just being able to come back to it 5 years later and someone removing all of that stuff would actually produce something that I'd be interested in watching. So it makes sense for that game, and quite right, it doesn't make sense for Dark Souls. That's just so much part of the progression. I don't know what it would look like in a Mario game. I don't know what it would look like in GTA. I mean, are we talking about just watching a video of all of the main central plotline stuff, which is going to be pretty boring, to be honest. Yeah. I think he talks about it in terms of World of Warcraft expansions, where if you want to start World of Warcraft and get to the Mists of Pandaria content, you actually have to play for like 80 hours beforehand before you can get there. And a lot of people have asked for them to make that as a shortcut thing, and a lot of fans think that undermines all of the work they put in to get to that later. I can understand both sides of that.
Yeah, I can as well, actually. Like, if you've really worked for something, then having it handed to someone else on a plate, even if it's something as silly as game content, there's an innate psychological thing there that you will just hate that. You'll be annoyed about it. Whether that should affect whether anyone should do it or not is a different matter. Well, the thing that interests me about this is that maybe there is scope for a game sort of on this scale, in this style, which doesn't have combat. So like an RPG walking simulator, if you will. One of the things I've noticed about walking simulators generally is that they're all first-person games, and I think it would be interesting to have a third-person RPG walking simulator.
I think that's pretty interesting. I think that that first-person really lends itself to walking simulators, which are a direct experience into you. And I'm slightly dubious that you wouldn't lose something with that, but I'd like to see it.
Yeah, slightly prompted by playing Hyper Light Drifter, which has pretty hard combat, and not combat that I generally like. Although I think the combat is fine, but the joy of that game is really in walking around the world and exploring. The feeling you get from exploring that world, because it's so beautiful, is quite astonishing, and it did make me think, that might be enough to sustain a certain kind of game in its own right. You'd obviously need to kind of compensate, I guess, in some ways for the lack of combat in a way which I'd say something like Dear Esther does do. There's a lot of effort in the music and the voiceover and so on, so you'd need to put that in. But yeah, just a thought.
I think this speaks to difficulty levels in general. I'm a big proponent of that you want to, as a designer, make the experience. I think that having 2 difficulty levels is too much. I think that you generally only have time as a developer to properly polish one of those things. And I think that you are making compromises. And I think, actually, I quite like the idea of framing stuff to make it easier as a cheat.
Yeah.
To make it clear that this is not the way that it was designed and intended, but we're giving you the option if you're someone who's just absolutely terrible at first-person shooter combat or something. So This is always just like a sideline, but it's an interesting thing to add in. Options are always good, as long as they don't compromise the core experience.
Yeah, I'm not really a fan of difficulty settings particularly. I kind of want to make sure I'm playing the canonical version, but then equally I understand, there's loads of people for whom they want to revisit a game they love and have a real challenge and so on, and some games are just too hard. So I think, yeah, it's difficult. Again, it's up to the developer. Leave it up to the developer, I think. Twitch streamer Rudism has finished their quest to reach the level cap in World of Warcraft using only a dance mat. Apparently he has also finished Mirror's Edge using a steering wheel, and Portal with a guitar controller. Now I've heard of things like this before, Ian Hardingham. What do you feel about the cultural import of the mistaken controller?
Well, I think it's great to use an inappropriate controller to finish a game. I think that's great. And more importantly, I think it's good to use a dance mat, because I bet this guy lost weight while he was doing this.
Sure.
Probably really good for his cardio. I think more of us should play games on dance mats. I'm going to do that today.
Good. I would like to see more games designed for dance mats, actually. I think the dance mat is the neglected controller of our generation. And I'm pleased you managed to get through this segment without mentioning the Novent Falcon, because that would be our default controller for all things, a controller that was designed without any specific games in mind. Yes.
Yeah, we should find the least appropriate pairing of game and controller. Please send in answers on a postcard.
Absolutely. According to a report in Gama Sutra, Rovio is changing focus away from developing new games and into creating a media empire to improve user retention and acquisition. According to its head of games, Wilhelm Tart, the company is moving towards games as a service. What does this mean?
Yes. Your introduction, I'm not sure really goes with what this is about. Let me just to be clear. Rovio has spent the last 5 years attempting to build a media empire, and they are now saying that that's been a failure basically, and they're going back to games, and that games as a service is where they're primarily focusing now. So I was interested in looking at Rovio's experiment. They made an awful lot of money with Angry Birds, and then they decided they wanted to be Disney. And I guess that didn't work, but I just saw an advert at the cinema last night for Angry Birds the movie.
Right.
So what if that does really well?
Yes. Now, in my introduction, I confused an alternate thing with a accompanying thing. So they are moving from games and a media empire to improving retention and acquisition on their existing games. So my inflection there was entirely confusing. So I know Rovio have been having real problems. They seem to, they had this 50% profit slip in 2013. It feels like they're just really stuck with the Angry Birds brand, and they adapted their entire company to be, around that, but they haven't managed to do the Supercell and kind of repeat their success particularly. And I feel like maybe that's kind of what they're trying to do now, belatedly. They're trying to sort of reorganize so that they can make another Angry Birds to some extent.
Yeah, I don't know if the problem is the IP or whether it's just F2P. Angry Birds itself is a very strong IP. I feel like they won the pre-F2P mobile land. Yeah. And then as they were trying to become Disney, everything changed, and now everything's Game of War and Candy Crush, which is interesting. I mean, in terms of a business decision, one of the interesting things here, which you alluded to, is they actually made a lot of these extremely ambitious decisions after they'd seen their profits go go down by 50% in 2013, they viewed that as being a sort of an anomaly. So they actually kind of made some big gambles, even after they'd started to see the writing on the wall. But, you know, you generally, you personally generally would praise a company for being, you know, really ambitious when you have that much money. And I'd be on board with that. But it's kind of, it does definitely feel like they're admitting that their grand plans haven't worked out.
Yeah, I think so, and it's so difficult to know what to do. I mean, there's an interesting comment in here, which is just about the rate that the Angry Birds brand grew. It's hard for any company to cope with that, let alone one that's sort of relatively new to all of that stuff. And there's always, like, you know, Crossy Road gets mentioned in this. There's always these weird premium outliers on iOS, which kind of, I feel, maybe get excessive attention in the face of the kind of hegemony of free to play. I really just don't envy the people making these decisions at this company. Like, this is a super difficult, very finely balanced situation, and you're kind of trying to play around with this alchemy of, like, is there a way that we can repeat it? Can we make it successful? And it feels very constrained to me. Unless they've really restructured it in a way that's going to facilitate lots of very free innovation within their company, which is allegedly what Supercell are all about, then I think they're going to really struggle.
It's so much harder in F2P than in Pay Once. In Pay Once, we just had to decide how much we're charging for our game at this one moment, basically. And little decisions like, do we have a demo or not? Or what should be in the demo? Whereas everything about F2P is up in the air. Like, you're talking about Crossy Road, that made millions of dollars from having video adverts that you got paid premium content to watch. Like, you can do almost anything.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of, it's such a wild west, and it's absolutely terrifying, because if you get it wrong, we can make no money whatsoever. There's something quite comforting about living in Pay Once land, which is relatively well understood.
Yeah, and this thing where you need to plow money into user acquisition and so on initially, so that you're taking these very big bets. But I mean, it must be so annoying for them to see Supercell, like, come in with Clash Royale and do some innovative-ish stuff, and then, you know, retake their territory again. That must be so hard.
Absolutely, but it moves fast, this mobile arena.
It does. Twitch competitor Hitbox have managed to acquire the streaming rights to all ESL events and all Wargaming.net events. The streaming site will also have exclusive rights to Russian and Portuguese DreamHack content. Are they going to become a meaningful Twitch competitor?
That's the question, and I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
I'm really annoyed with Twitch. I'm fed up of them. They're not moving fast enough. I want someone to get in there, mess things around, get Amazon to pay attention. I want to see some more meaningful progression from Twitch.
Right. So they've signed up ESL, which I think ESL tend to kind of duck in and out of relevance somewhat. Also, ESL also signed a similar deal with Azubu, signing over exclusive content and marketing collaborations. So I'm not quite sure what exclusivity means in this context. It does seem a little bit confused. So this thing about trying to get exclusive content, I mean, I haven't used Hitbox for a very long time. I used it a bit during the early days of StarCraft, when basically people who got banned from Twitch or got annoyed with Twitch went over and started using Hitbox. I'm actually mildly surprised that Hitbox are still around, but then I suppose with all of the incredible buzz about esports at the moment, then people are going to be wanting to put money into these things as a sort of way into esports. So there's that. I mean, yes, it is good that there's competition happening. I'm not sure if I'm as bullish as you on Hitbox being a meaningful competitor to Twitch.
It's more of a wish list, that one. I'm using Hitbox right now because I've never used it. Looks a lot like Twitch.
Yeah.
I don't know if this thing where I can see the player sort of green screened onto the action in the bottom right is some kind of proprietary technology, or just something that everyone's doing nowadays.
It's something that everyone's doing
probably.
Nowadays. Yep.
This looks fine. Yeah, again, I'm still kind of waiting for the channel on these things that I can watch and not have to worry about having long delays, which I know isn't really a Twitch problem. But I would like to see a serious competitor, and if you even in something as mature now as streaming TV shows and videos, there are two real proper players. There's Netflix obviously at the top. Amazon's doing quite well. Sky's got their thing as well. So there's almost certainly space, I think. And all it takes is a couple of really good exclusive deals to get people to understand that they can watch their games on 2 different platforms. I think you and me have argued before about the barriers to entry that that Twitch provide or does not provide, and I was always sort of under the impression that it's just about opening a new tab and going to a new website. There's not much sort of investment that you have to have as a viewer. We disagreed on that, I think, but until it happens, we're not going to know.
Right. I mean, people do really like the Twitch infrastructure, and they've been allowing a lot more features, following specific games and so on, as well as following individual broadcasters. There's the entire chat infrastructure and so on. So yes, to me, it is a bit harder than just that. But I take that point. Like it's not. It's quite close to having a different subscription, TV package or whatever. Probably even easier than that. So there's no real sort of entrenched thing there. Obviously, there's technological barriers for another company to come in. But I do think competition is good. Again, rehashing all our normal things with this. My problem with Twitch is the client accessibility on various devices and stuff. I always feel that could be better. What do you think about, a slight tangent, there's been these really enormous valuations of sort of esports as a marketplace recently, billions and billions of dollars of esports as a marketplace, and there's a big esports conference in London at the moment talking about the kind of commercial opportunities there. Do you feel, and this is going to be super vague, do you feel that that's really overblown at the moment, or that there genuinely is going to be this massive multi-billion-dollar future market in esports?
It's a really uneducated response to that, but my gut feeling is that that's overblown.
Yeah.
This is a free market, and it's a very well understood one, sport. And when I really start seeing tournaments be funded predominantly by viewership and not by sponsorship of hardware companies and by funding from the people who make the games themselves, then I'll start to feel like we've reached the next phase. Now, I don't particularly doubt that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I definitely want to see that happen before I'm willing to buy any shares in this stuff.
I really feel like we're missing something in esports, and to me, it's not necessarily the sort of the channel thing, and it's more like I feel like we might need the next generation of games where this infrastructure is known already for it to go to absolutely the next level, which is kind of what you describe, where it's not always owned by the companies involved. And it's driven by advertising to that viewer base as a whole rather than just sponsoring an individual event. So yeah, I think there are some infrastructure things there. Are people going to come in and make loads of money with some esports companies? Well, probably they are with maybe Twitch. I mean, I can see that happening. I can see that having been a good investment for certain people at a certain time. You could have spotted that one, and I feel Twitch is going to go on and grow hugely. But in terms of other things, leagues and stuff, I don't know. It's always been such a shaky proposition. Esports things tend to rise up and die very quickly. So that kind of valuation makes me uncomfortable a little bit as well.
The question I have is this the X Games? Does this need to be like the X Games? The X Games or athletics in general. It's not about one particular game. It's not about StarCraft, and it's not about the 200-meter weird sprint or whatever.
Yep.
It's about creating a product which combines a lot of those things, and that's the product. And I always have been suspicious that that's the right product for pro gaming. And the reason why I have that feeling is because that's what I want. I want to be presented with a slight mix of things. I actually do want to watch a bit of League of Legends and a bit of World of Tanks. I definitely don't want to watch 2.5 hours of World of Tanks. Sorry. I probably don't even want to watch 2.5 hours of CS or StarCraft 2, but I definitely would like to watch a kind of ongoing live sporting event where I was dipping into a few of these, like the experience I have watching the Olympics. So for me, I think that maybe that could be the right format, and if it is, then the company to nail that will make a lot of money.
Yeah, whereas I still, I strongly don't think that is a good direction. So it needs to be... Yeah, you need to collect that audience together more. Well, we talk about this a lot, and I think that there will be some new developments in this soon, and maybe Hitbox Growing will be one of those, but it's still an interesting thing to think
Yeah, it
about.
feels a bit like we're on a plateau right now.
Yeah.
It feels like the
yeah.
last year has been relatively consolidationary, so we're waiting for the next big disruptive thing.
For some players, the latest World of Tanks update has added features that feel too much like pay to win. The major new feature is something called provisions, which are expensive consumable items that have no cooldown, unlike other consumable items in the game. At this point, would it be possible for them to ruin World of Tanks?
I thought it was time for us to revisit pay to win. It's something that we talked about a lot years ago, back when people weren't sure whether it was going to become a big thing or not. And really, these free-to-play games, I think, have kind of made pay to win okay.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty accepted now. World of Tanks is so unbelievably popular and already has quite a lot of pay to win mechanics. Apparently, this is too far. As you say in the question, what is too far? I mean, I can't imagine wanting to play World of Tanks if I can't play properly competitively unless I've dropped £5 on this map. But that's always how I felt about pay to win, and that's never been borne out in what people are willing to do. So I don't really know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I feel so alienated from this because you need to be so heavily involved with World of Tanks to really kind of know exactly what this is like. Having said that, I wouldn't like the idea that, someone I was on a server with could just deploy this stuff that gives them these random benefits at any time. That would seem to be just not fun to me. I feel kind of concerned about this. I feel like pay to win stuff should really be based around, pay to get a significant advantage, but where that advantage is known from the outset, because then you get that fun thing of beating someone who has paid more, which I believe, it was a few years ago, I believe that's still an important factor in how people factor these things in. This doesn't feel like that to me.
Yeah, it's always a game design problem, it's a game balance problem and everything like that. Just to shift slightly, I'm going to go back and try Tribes Ascend again, because they've just released a big update. Another big update, the second in 4 months or so, which really changes a lot of the internal game design, removing a lot of the stuff they had in there to support free-to-play. They went away from the core Tribes class system, or rather lack of class system, and they've taken out classes as the new Tribes Ascend classes. So that's like just going in the opposite direction to everything we're talking about. They're saying we want to get rid of all of the compromises that were made for free to play, and I'm going to report back on what that's like as a change. I mean, World of Tanks is just one of the most extraordinary things to have happened in gaming. Who would have guessed this would be right up there in the most popular games of all time?
I know tanks again, and not the kind of thing you expect people to get this excited about, but it's just something around the structure of that game and the team-based play that you can do in it, and a lot of things as well.
I think tanks itself, though, I think it is first and foremost the concept of tanks. I think a lot more people feel a lot stronger about tanks than I ever understood.
Right, exactly. They love those tanks. You remember the old tank games, the M1, M2 Abrams, whatever it was called they were always sims. They were really complicated. You have loads of buttons. You had to raise scopes and fire lasers and stuff to target your things. And this kind of jaunty tank MMO comes along and it owns them all. And my original question, can they mess it up at this point? I guess they can. There's always scope for, maybe there's a World of Tanks mod out there which is more popular than the game, and that's going to become the new Dota of tanks. That's always possible. But I don't know. It's so consolidated.
Absolutely. It's very bulletproof right now.
An article on Vice claims that competitive video games have cultivated the Bernie Bro movement, who, if you don't know about that, are very aggressive, intellectually sort of brutish Bernie Sanders supporters. Do you think there's any connection between gaming culture and Bernie Bros?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but there was sort of one core interesting point in this, which is the idea that the millennials, or whatever ridiculous word we're using to describe young people at the moment, because they play so many games, they're sort of used to competing on a level playing field, and then they look at life and see how much That's not like a level playing field, and get really angry. So I thought that was a point of view worth at least talking about on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like there's this whole problem with this sort of social science unsupported stuff, which is very much like people believe that you take these things very literally. So if you experience something a lot, it means that you very literally apply that to other areas of your life. And certainly my experience is not that that's the case. Things can have an influence on you. And I think it's very possible that games and gaming communities and the kind of behavior that goes on around games can have a formative influence on you. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that competitive video games created the Bernie Bros, which is kind of the deliberately overextending headline in this article. But I think there's something there worth exploring.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know what the long-term cultural significance of such a huge proportion of young people having played a lot of video games will be.
Yeah.
Because we haven't got there yet. And
Yeah.
I could see it having a real political thing. I mean, they talk in this article about how sport was really important to integration and to getting over racist attitudes. And that is both related to this and in a lot of ways not related to this. I think any time that you are playing with others, people who are different to you geographically, racially, politically, it helps form bonds. I think sport and playing games from genetic reasons is incredibly useful to all of that. And I know that the more people that you are exposed to online in a good way that you communicate with, the better it is. So I think that's similar to games. Or however, one of the reasons that sport really promoted integration is that the teams wanted to win, and people could get over their racism, for want of a less offensive word. They could get over that because they actually wanted to win more than they wanted to be racist. And that doesn't seem like it would have much of a parallel here.
No, that's true. I do think that also this stuff sort of slightly denies the ways in which games, particularly multiplayer games, can be positive. I remember listening to a podcast with two journalists who had Asperger's syndrome, and one of them said that he really liked games, and one of the reasons he was a games journalist was that because in a game, the motives of every agent in the game are really clear. So if it's a multiplayer game, people want to win the game. And that was something that he felt, as somebody who couldn't necessarily understand complex social cues or very complex motivations in a social situation, because he was collaborating with someone who wanted this really clear thing. For him, that was good, and it was a way of understanding other behavior from people. So I do think that kind of the way in which games boil things down to clearly defined parameters can be really useful in terms of the way you look at life, as well as potentially sort of reductive and counterproductive.
Yeah, I really like that story. That makes a lot of sense. Games are predominantly about simplified playgrounds, simplified rule sets that allow you to, as a human, test out stuff and get experience in a less high stakes way. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So, to bring it back to the topic, I have no idea. I guess young people are massively pro Bernie Sanders. I'm always surprised by how high a percentage of 18 to 29-year-olds in the States are for him versus for Hillary Clinton. It's such a high proportion. Obviously, those people are playing a lot of computer games. Is there a link beyond that? I don't know. I'm not buying it to anywhere near the extent this article puts across, but we'll see how it evolves over the next 10 years.
Some people have had a bit of a problem with this article. I mean, it's certainly overextending itself, but it is on Vice, for one thing. So there's that. And also, I think some of the implications are interesting. Yeah, I suppose I factually disagree with it. I mean, I think it is a bit facetious to say that this stuff is causal, but interesting anyway. Steve Hoggerty has written an in-depth investigation for City AM about what makes so-called job simulators compelling. Most players find the games relaxing, and according to some, this is due to the methodical and repetitive nature, along with a constant sense of improvement through immediate feedback. Other people have said that job simulators are innately patronizing ways for the idle rich to experience real life, this kind of vicarious, I don't know, weird association with menial labor, which I find very interesting. Anyway, job simulators. What do you think about that?
This podcast is really going downhill. Let me try and get this back on track. So I wanted to talk about this article because I'm kind of interested in what is so good about simulators like European Trucking Simulator or Weird Boat Simulator or Farming Simulator. That they're really popular and they're really compelling. I have to say that I don't think it's any of the interesting sociological arguments put forward in this article, though. I think that the simple fact of the matter is that it's a genre which is very detailed about something very narrow, and that's just very exciting to people.
Yes.
People love learning, and there's such a density of learning within these simulators, and they're so different to anything they've played before, because you can guarantee that being a tree surgeon simulator is going to teach you more in 5 minutes that you didn't know than anything else. So I think that's what it's about. I think that they also tend to be very relaxing because they're not about twitch reactions, and they tend to be at a slow pace, and they don't tend to have really hard fail mechanics. And when you do fail, interesting things tend to happen. So unfortunately, I think that there are lots of really understood concrete game design reasons why these are popular.
Sure, and that's fine, but I don't think that precludes anything else. I mean, the game design stuff is going to be at the root of the person's sensation when they play the game. But the other aspects of this, for example, there's something that I would be drawn to is that you're going into a very interesting world. So I thought it'd be interesting to play American Truck Simulator because I like the idea of a game where you're just sort of gently traveling around a simulated America and feeling kind of immersed in that. And I think that kind of thing is facilitated by the mechanics, but I wouldn't necessarily preclude, all of this other stuff as well.
Sure, I totally buy that. I think that they are really immersive. It's obviously a more realistic fantasy. It's still a fantasy, but it's a lot more realistic. And one of the other things is, so many games we play, they're so sort of they are themselves immersed in the culture of video games, the history of video games. I've been playing Enter the Gungeon, and that just couldn't be more referential in so many different ways, especially the way it looks, but so many other aspects of it. And these games, they're not really about nodding to the history of video games. They're off on a completely different tangent. They're getting all of their references from some obscure thing that I don't know anything about. And that's really exciting as well. There's nothing people like more really in entertainment, or there's not, that's too hyperbolic. There's something that people really love is, again, experiencing a fully formed culture that they've never experienced before and seeing all the fun aspects of it. So yeah, I love simulator games. And it also created Goat Simulator, which is great.
Simulators are now really associated with that parody genre as well. But I think there's something there in terms of like the things you're doing are so ridiculous in those games. Certainly in Goat Simulator, that you want to go and experience that as well. You want to know what it's like to be a goat and crash into a petrol station. I mean, I certainly do. You're right about this. The thing about exploring different types of reference base is really interesting to me because that happens in different mediums, quite a lot. We talk about TV a bit on this podcast, and some of the shows that are really great are ones that take their parameters not necessarily from a historical TV context, or at least they obfuscate that to some degree. So I feel like simulators are really interesting because they're sort of non-gamey. I mean, there's some comments in this article about the rewards and so on, but I do think simulators defer rewards in a very different way to, say a shooter, and that's cool.
Yeah.
According to Games mid-year investors report, the company is doing well despite a large acquisition, that of Multiplay, and a slight fall in margins and profits. Now, producer Jimmy has facilitated this, and he's written this intro, and I wanted to start off by saying this is a classic report from a company that just had a pretty tough year that is putting a positive spin on it, because you can see the contrast between the director's comments and the actual numbers here. Anyway, what do you think about Game?
Right, so producer Jim asked me this morning what I wanted to talk about in this, and I'd forgotten.
Okay.
So I said, I've forgotten. Now that I've read it in preparation for the show, I've remembered.
Okay, good.
And it's simply about that this tells us what the adoption rate for this generation of consoles is versus the adoption rate for the last generation of consoles, which is something we can talk about.
I see.
At this point in the PS3, Xbox 360 life cycle, there were 3.5 million units sold in England, I believe. Yes, in England. And in this generation, PS4, Xbox One, it's 5.1 million. So that's a really significant increase.
Yep.
Even though this is post-recession and this period, I think, was pre-recession for the last console generation. This console generation is doing really well. Unfortunately, we don't know how much of that is Xbox One versus PS4 from this article. I'm guessing it's probably about 2/3 PS4, maybe a little bit more. I don't know, but yeah, we're doing good.
It's really interesting to see this kind of report in that context of like a sort of very healthy console marketplace, because that should be where certainly retail should be thriving from that. And I'm just interested to put this into the context of what Game are trying to do here. Like they've got their fingers in a lot of different pies. They're really trying to expand. Acquiring multiplayer is really interesting. We just had a great time at Insomnia, one of the sort of most egalitarian, I think, gaming events that we've seen. So, I mean, in terms of specifically this console adoption thing, I wonder about overall kind of growth of the gaming market as well as a component of that. I don't know if we're in a sort of unique time specifically for consoles.
No, sure. I just think it's it's a very concrete data point. I agree that it speaks more to the growth of the market than anything else. Consoles are pretty popular in this country, certainly nowadays. The rest of the report, I mean, it's pretty funny. It spends a lot of time talking about Spain, which I guess is the only country that Game actually had increased profit in last quarter or something like that. Pretty amazing just how incredibly boring a lot of these numbers are, and they're quite impenetrable. I think purposefully so. Some of the graphs, certainly to me. But there you go. Really, I mean, Game's still there. Why did they buy Multiplay?
Well, I mean, I think that makes sense as an acquisition. If you want to
big trade show, you want
to go into events. I mean, events is certainly an emergent area. If you look at kind of investment reports into the whole of gaming, events keep getting flagged as something. I mean, for a tangible example, look at the growth of Rezzed. We just come back from Rezzed. I'm
not saying it's a dumb investment. I'm just sort of trying to work out, where exactly a game going. Do they have an understanding or a feeling that their retail stuff is just going to continue going downwards forever, and they're trying to pivot? Is this a small part of their portfolio now?
I mean, it doesn't represent a pivot. I would say it's definitely, yes, a portfolio approach. In terms of trying to future-proof, I don't know. It is somewhat hard to tell without some deeper analysis of this, like exactly where they expect to be investing next. I think there's still yes, a lot of mentions of retail as a core. So this definitely, to me, doesn't represent a pivot away from retail. Normally, you'd see statistics on the number of stores they've closed if that was going to happen.
Yeah, we should have a game watch every week. We should pay attention to this failing, old, somewhat important company and just be the last people, like with the lamp on, sort of waving a candle to the demise of this thing.
Well, Game are an interesting company. I think they have this really interesting position. I could see why investors were willing to come in and prop them up when they really suffered before. And there's a lot going on here. I mean, they're making money, and not a small amount of money. They're making less money than they were before, but they're still making money. So there is that, at least.
Yeah, making money is good.
Making money is good. Yes, we should pay more attention to Game. Ding. Right. Survival game Rust has now added female character models. Much like when skin tone and facial features were added, the model is assigned based on the player's Steam ID. It's effectively random and cannot be changed. This has caused a lot of controversy. My question to you is, should developers just pursue their own creative ideas in these territories, or should they be very sensitive to the concerns of their players?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to have to warm up to that question. So this is about gender. Previous to them adding the female gender, what they have this great system, which is that you basically kind of have a randomized model that's based on your Steam ID that you can't change, as you said, and that's really cool. Yeah. It's like giving you this avatar within the Rust world that you have zero control over. Yeah. That persists with you forever, which is, as they say, a way of kind of recognizing people in game and not requiring people to spend a lot of time making their own model, and also sort of taking away all of the pressures of having to make your own avatar. I really like it. I think that's absolutely awesome. Makes me really excited. Now, of course, gender's got involved and it's got a lot more complicated. Yeah. So now your gender is as randomized as the rest of you, and a very pithy quote from, I think, the guy who makes Rust, or someone. We understand that you may now be a gender that you don't identify with in real life. We understand this causes you distress and makes you want to not play the game anymore. Technically, nothing has changed, since half the population was already living with those feelings. So, just so we're clear, they're saying that, before, when there were only men in the game, all of the women felt exactly the same way that all of you silly men feel now, that you've got a female avatar, which I think is incredibly inflammatory, and smacks of smugness and sort of and superiority. This quote, and I think he deserves to be in trouble for that. Okay. So the core question. I saw you talking a lot about this on Twitter earlier. I think you're on the side of the creators here. It's such a hot button topic right now. I think it's pretty amazing to force people to be a random gender, and then kind of say, this is some sort of political statement, full stop.
So the first thing, I did talk about this on Twitter, and it was really interesting, actually. I got some very, very good and very thoughtful replies. I didn't get anyone getting annoyed with me. I mean, I was mostly asking questions, and I clarified that I was asking questions because I wanted people's opinions. So I felt that was a good way of approaching that, which is just really interesting, because I always expect to sort of mildly cause a huge argument whenever I talk about gender on Twitter, but it didn't happen. Anyway, so the game assigns you a character model. It does not assign you a gender. So it doesn't say you are female and give you a body with breasts and a vagina, which is initially what I thought it was saying. So it doesn't make any verbal or linguistic reference to your gender. It just gives you a body in the game. And there are two main groups of people who feel upset by this. There are cisgender men who don't want to play as women in an online game because it makes them feel bad. And then there are transgender people who don't want to be, and this is much more complex than I thought initially, they don't want to be in a system where it's demonstrated to them that they could have a different body, but they're not allowed to have that. Just and the body that they're given is something that causes them distress. I definitely
understand that. Just before we get into describing that, but it does basically assign with a gender, right? Because it assigns you with a body which is sort of broadly identifiably a male or a female.
It does not assign you a gender, it just assigns you a body type.
Right, but the body itself either looks like a man or woman, right?
Well, I mean, that depends on the body type exists. The game does not define what gender that body type is associated with. So you could have a body with breasts and a vagina and identify as a man in the game if you chose to do that.
Yes, okay. So complications of the modern complexities of gender. You are given a body which looks either like a woman or it looks like a man.
So I've seen people define this as the difference between sex and gender.
Right.
And I don't know how comfortable people are with that distinction in general. So I would use the term, I guess, body type or model, because it is literally a model within the game. That's the way I found of talking about it, which seems to be most clear.
Okay, so we get back to, there are two separate problems. There are men annoyed about being forced to play as women, and trans people who find it upsetting to see gender without having the option of changing theirs.
That is, I believe, correct. Yes.
I mean, for me, and what I mentioned earlier, primarily the idea of introducing gender quite possibly as a response to complaints about there not being two genders in the game to start with. But then making it arbitrary and uncontrollable which gender you are is a pretty amazing thing to do.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really strong thing, and I basically think it's trolling. I think there are other reasons why it's like that. I think that he's got lots of reasons why he had this randomized system in to start with. This is an extension of that. It makes complete sense on those terms, but I think doing this is trolling. And I think that is one of the reasons why it's getting such a huge amount of negative attention. There's such a difference between Derek Yu responding to the feedback of having damsels in distress being female in Spelunky and adding a male damsel in distress and a dog damsel in distress, being very sort of interested and engaged on the topic and not being trolley, and this, which again I think comes across as very trolley. So I think even before you try and get into the real details of the morals, etc., I think people are just going to be annoyed because this is, a cisgender person or whatever, or man or whatever, making this decision. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's another major point. So that's kind of the third point here, is that because of the nature of this, it being so aggressive, one thing that someone said to me that I thought was really interesting is that because it's so aggressive, it causes people to get angry, and that makes them behave badly towards people of other genders and gender orientations. So effectively, by making this choice of, as you describe it, a trolley choice that's going to upset people, you create a negative atmosphere around it. Now, I still side with the right of creators to do things that are challenging and could potentially have negative consequences. But in this instance, like, the negative consequences here are so big, maybe it's worth not doing on those terms. I'm still exploring this. I find this absolutely fascinating and quite difficult to think about.
Sure, I feel completely the same, that it's, of course, someone's right to make a political statement about gender or sex in their games. I think that is basically what he's done. And the reason why I'm sort of critical of it is simply because the response is completely predictable. And I think it feels to me that it's less of a political statement and more of a bit of an immature bit of trolling, which I don't mean to be too critical of Gary Newman, who's awesome, but that's how this comes across to me. And I'm not someone who has a massive amount of inbuilt sort of personal problems with this whole issue. I'm just sort of viewing this as a societal thing that's happening on Twitter. And I think it's kind of, if I had a game that was as successful as Rust, I would most certainly not be doing anything as inflammatory as this. This, they're unlikely to kill Rust. Rust is so popular, and, you've always got a large group of people who will sort of side with the creator on this kind of thing. But this is a really big apocalyptic level event for the game. I mean, it could become socially unacceptable to play Rust in certain social groups. I mean, that definitely happens.
Yeah.
So you were getting into this kind of, it's so hard to discuss this when I don't believe that this decision was made for creative reasons. Right. Because we can move it into a discussion of that, of like, if this was made for X reason, would that be okay? We can obviously do that. It's sort of quite hard, though, when you just have this feeling this was done because he was annoyed that people made such a fuss about there not being women. And now has come up with a lot of sort of mansplaining stuff about,
I mean, I'm probably not going to go that far. I think it might have been, like, I would say, an overly dogmatic, logical extension of the existing system. It's kind of going like, well, we already randomly do this, so we're going to randomly do everything. And then just kind of like a mic drop rather than this is going to really piss everyone off, I feel. It's sort of almost
it's definitely possible,
caring about that than it is deliberately trying to do it wrong. So I feel like it's kind of midway between this very thought through creative decision, which clearly isn't, and just sort of doing it to piss people off. It's midway between those two things, I think. And that's interesting territory for me. I mean, I think my position on this really generally is I wish it was okay to do this. Because it's really interesting to me that you go into this world, and as some other people have said, it's a survival world. You just have to take what you're given. And you just get this random character, and that character belongs to you. And you just have to deal with everything to do with that character, including their physical appearance. I would love that to be okay. But I kind of feel that socially it just isn't okay because of the groups of people that it's likely to upset and the way in which it's likely to upset them. I mean,
so I'm going to
yeah.
guess that before this whole happened, there were different skin colors.
Yes.
And it's kind of interesting that the day and age we live in now is that there was no problem, because you can imagine people in the past having problems about rolling a character that had the wrong skin color for them.
I think there were problems, but this is probably, and it was discussed at the time, but maybe this has created more discussion.
I mean, I want to be clear that I love this system. I love everything about this idea. Too much in games is modifiable, and the idea of sort of having this one-off thing in a game that you cannot change is really exciting to me.
Yeah.
And certainly I wouldn't be... I think... Well, I mean, if they had sort of some random mutation, only had one leg, made it really hard to play the game, that would be slightly different, I suppose. I still feel like sex and gender are very complex matters, and sometimes you find it hard to relax when you are controlling a member of the sex that you feel sort of complicated feelings about, which I guess is somewhat what's going on with the trans response to this as well. I don't know what else I can say apart from that. I mean, what's he going to do next?
Yeah, what is he going to do next?
Is he going to make this optional? Because there is some ways in which that really does undermine everything. Is he going to go back to men only? And is he going to have certain months where everyone's a man and certain months where everyone's a girl? This is really tough. I'm just starting to wish that there was a neutral gender.
Right.
That we could just go to so we didn't have to deal with all this nonsense.
I think the thing that really interests me was the response of a transgender person saying to me that it's because it's possible to have the gender that I want, and so much of my life is based on this immense trauma of my body, not affording me the characteristics of the gender that I am. That's such an interesting point of view to me, because a lot of people are being, there's some very angry comments at Gary sort of saying, you're forcing me to relive trauma in my life and so on. And that's from a system that's random. It's kind of interesting to see it framed in those terms. So to me, it's like you're showing someone this thing they potentially could make them feel great, and you're arbitrarily keeping it away from them, is just not something I think anyone would ever have considered when coming up with this system, but is an important consideration.
Yeah, I mean, we're so deep into people feeling strongly that the entertainment that they consume does not violate strong personal issues that they are having, that I don't know if there's anything more to be said about it. I mean, I certainly understand people who do not have these problems sort of rolling their eyes and wondering why such a fuss is being made, but we're so far beyond that. We're trying to be a caring society, and a lot of people are fighting very hard to be taken seriously. And I just kind of want people to try and provide the options that make people happy, unless there is a very, very clear creative reason, which there can be. I mean, if you want to tell a certain kind of story in a walking simulator, you may feel that you need to set the gender, and I definitely understand that. I don't think that's unfair. But in a game like Rust, in a survival sim, I think that maybe I'm being too harsh to him. Maybe now that he's had this response, and he's had a bit of time to calm down, he will find a new solution. We'd all love to live in a world where we can just do whatever we want because we personally don't have any sort of bad intentions. Just because I don't have an internal dislike of a particular group doesn't mean that the art I create can't have a negative aspect, and that's not my responsibility anymore. Games.
I think one of the things, the final thing I want to talk about on this is that those categories where you should be allowed as the developer to choose the character gender and the character physical expression of said gender, and when you should offer options for someone to choose it, because I feel like this is a really interesting test case for that. So I think most people reasonably agree that in a narrative game where the protagonist's narrative contains elements that pertain directly to their gender, it is acceptable to lock the gender of that character. I mean, to be, that would preclude so much existing art that I feel like it would be unreasonable to assert that. So there's that. But I had somebody was saying to me that if it's a campaign mode, then you should be allowed to lock it. But if it's a sandbox game, then you shouldn't. So there's this point where my line on this has always been, in a game where you can customize the character to a reasonable degree, you should be allowing for all genders and gender expressions. It's something that we did in Frozen Cortex. We want to do more in our games because it doesn't matter for that character. It's not relevant to the narrative. So do you think that is the line relevant to narrative, or can there be some design criteria, some caveats where you should be allowed to lock gender?
Well, all of the things I can think of start to just be immediately problematic, because what you're doing when you're saying there's a design reason for this is that you're saying that which sex you are is important. And then you're kind of basically immediately at that point bringing up all of the big arguments, because this is all about whether sex is important or not, and you're just going to get in massive trouble if you start going down that route. So if I was making a game about what being a white cisgender man is like, then I'm going to have all sorts of other problems beyond the fact that I'm making a game where you can only play as a white cisgender male. So I can't think of a sort of a design reason, beyond this thing of trying to have diversity of what people look like without allowing people to choose, which in itself is a very valid thing.
Yeah.
Maybe I just hope he sticks with it because it's so cool.
Right. I feel like this is the whole question for me. It's such an interesting innovation, and it brings up so many of these challenging things. And because it doesn't tell you what gender you are, you're free to interpret the character's physical makeup in whatever way you choose. You can say that you're playing a transgender character, for example, and you can talk about that if that's something that you want to do. But the character isn't you. In this game, it's very explicitly not you, and I feel like in a design situation where you're saying to the player, this character is not you, it's not your avatar, then people need to be more accepting of these constraints. But I'm, like I say, I'm still open to people's opinions on this if they want to talk to me about it. But that's kind of where I'm getting to with it.
Sure. I mean, again, it sounds like you're trying to open the discourse on the subject, talking about areas in which people's instant emotional reactions might not be valid. As in kind of, this has upset you, but maybe it shouldn't, for instance. And I think it's always a tough thing to do with that thing. I'd always rather make art where I don't have to worry about that too much.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly challenging, and I'm not. I want to say also, I'm not diminishing people. If someone says something is traumatic for them and they wanted to experience this game and they can't because it's traumatic for them, you got to listen to that. Like that's information that you need to listen to, and you have to evaluate whether that is sufficient for you to move away from some other points that you might want to make with something. I mean, just returning, to what you said at the start, it would be better if there was a robust defense of this out there that you could really look at, then it would be easier to defend it on those terms. But anyway, I feel like it's still interesting, and one of the things that I've liked most about this is having a productive discussion about that. So well done, everyone.
Well done.
Right, that's enough of that. We don't have anything in your magic corner this week.
We will do next week. I have something planned.
Okay, planned. We're not going to play Magic on the show. Don't get excited, everyone. I want to move into the film and television lounge area, and I'd like to talk a bit about Better Call Saul, because I'm now up to date with episodes after last night. I think you are as well, I believe.
I'm halfway through last night's episode.
Okay, so I don't think anything particularly happens that is relevant to this discussion, at least. So I want to come out and say that I think this is the worst season, and I think that there have been some really significant problems in this season. One of them being Mike's story being pretty boring, and the other, slightly related to what you said to me recently, which is that you're really in bad prequel territory. You're finding it hard to care about what's happening to them because of that. I'm finding it hard to care about what's happening to them because what's happening to them is boring, which is a different problem. What do you think?
Yeah, I certainly don't disagree. This feels like a bit of filler here. The basic filmmaking of the show is still very good. Good cinematography, great acting, good writing, good dialogue. But the broader stuff that's happening, you know, for me, when you know where something's basically headed, the stuff that happens on the way better be quite exciting. And sort of, you know, the back and forth between Saul and his brother is not that exciting. Mike's stuff is just very slow moving. Like, it's the slowest moving Mexican drug war storyline I've ever seen.
Yep.
It's still good, and I still have a lot of faith that they can sort problems out. So Series 3 might look really different. And I don't want it to go away. But no, there's no question that I'm not sort of massively enjoying this.
I feel like Breaking Bad had a similar phase in whichever season it was where he's mostly at home with his family. Is it 3?
Yeah, for
3.
me, I remember the series quite well. I really think that Series 4 and 5 were like truly transcendentally great.
Yes.
And I thought that Series 1 was disruptive and interesting and exciting. And sort of the first half of Series 2 was pretty good. And I thought that the second half of Series 2 and all of Series 3 were pretty middling a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe it's following that format. If that's sort of what you're getting at, it's possible.
I feel like they're trying to queue up a couple of really big surprises, and they need to kind of get things into a specific position. But yeah, it's been, there hasn't been much character development with Saul. In fact, Saul's been in it less, quite a lot less this time. So yeah, it's running into problems. But I wonder if they're running it the same way as they did with Breaking Bad. I presume they are, where they can really change things up mid-season. And they're just
you know,
in a
Saul
rut
is
right now.
such a great character as he is. And that's one of the problems they have as well, which is that they want to develop him, but he's such an amazingly good character right now.
Yeah.
And you know, certainly Jesse from the first one was as annoying as often he was good. And Walter White was good, you know, but you know, not this kind of great, very sort of emotionally endearing, very empathetic, but also quite interesting character. Like, you know, it's tough to move away from that, as you need to go further towards a more one-dimensional character, which is kind of where he's supposed to be going.
Right. Yes. So I'm still enjoying it. I'm still hopeful for it, but it's interesting to see it genuinely get into problems. And it's taken. I'm glad this didn't happen at the outset, because obviously that would have been terrible for the creators. But they've run themselves into a hole, and it'll be interesting to see where they go.
Yeah.
I want to quickly talk about Flaked.
Did you finish it?
I haven't finished it yet, no. I'm still enjoying it. I've got to the episode where McLovin arrives.
Yes!
And now I wanted to raise this because when your show is getting a little bit stagnant, which it was, the best thing you can possibly do is bring in McLovin as a tech billionaire.
Episode really like kicked itself in the pants. Like, you're totally right. That was like when it sort of really turned a corner for me.
Right. So just before that, you have the really weird episode with Kirstie Alley, who is the guy's mother, and they go to that wellness clinic, but then they bring in McLovin, and it's just, McLovin is amazing. I can't remember the actor's name, but I feel like he's just McLovin, so we don't need to know that. He's really great. He's a really great comic actor, that guy. He's playing a different character in this, to be fair. This really sinister character in many ways. He's just horrible. And I hope he's in it more, because I like him. He's a good
the show also, like, believe it or not, after that spa episode with his mum, the show kind of very slightly jumps the shark from here. Like, actually, that thing in the spa with his mum was like within the normal bounds of the show, and now it kind of slightly goes off on one.
Good. I feel like I'm ready for that, though, because it was getting very, very sleepy and very static.
Yeah.
But I'm still, again, a really, really great show. Just a lightly entertaining show with some dark stuff in. I mean, they make the stuff they do with the main plotline is really boring, but I feel like the main plotline is not the main point of the show, so it doesn't particularly matter.
Yeah, we like Flaked.
Good for Flaked. That's enough of that, and now it's time to delve back into the distant and murky past with games that were released this week in 2006, thanks to Eurogamer and producer Jimmy. Not too many this week, so if you hate this feature, you'll be happy. The 13th of April 2006, we had Auto Assault on the PC. Now, car combat games, Ian Hardingham, there have been many of these throughout the years. I'm guessing this is one, just because of its name. It's got to be a car combat game,
I liked Midtown Madness.
Right.
But that's not really that's not a car combat game. So
yeah, I mean, look at this. It's got the guy with the monocle. Why do all driving games have guys with monocles? Is it because it's scary, the idea of someone who is visually impaired in one eye, driving
Now,
at you aggressively.
Quake Rally was such a standout. The original
Yep.
Quake 1 Rally. You know, that's just spoiled any other game like this for me. I loved that so much. It had a really, really strange mouse and keyboard control system for a car. It was fabulous. I don't really want to see anything else after that.
No, we need to bring back Quake. Yeah, this didn't get very good reviews. 7.5 from IGN. Condemned Criminal Origins on the PC. I've never played a Condemned game.
No.
Not something I'm particularly interested in. The Sims 2 family fun stuff on the PC. We're still stuck in Sims 2 expansion hell at this point. Battlefield 2 Modern Combat. Battlefield is a game that people like on the
Yes.
Xbox 360. I think Battlefield 2 was one that people hark back to, wasn't it? Am I right about
Yeah, but
that?
I don't know what the 360 version was like. Like Battlefield 2 on the PC was pretty important. But I'm pretty sure that that's not the same game as this.
No,
actually.
this didn't appear to... Yeah, this was a console version. It did not appear to be popular. Dragon Quest Journey of the Cursed King on the PS2. Never played a Dragon Quest game.
Yawn.
Yawn. SingStar Rocks on the PS2. SingStar was a big deal back in the day. Football Manager 2006 on the Xbox 360. I was very happy to see Miles from Sports Interactive recently. And he has a great life making Football Manager games and being a director of Watford Football Club, which is presumably the dream of everyone who designs football games. An awesome man who does a lot for the games industry. We do like Miles. James Bond's 007 from Russia with Love on the PSP. Now,
No idea.
no, I'm going to look this one up because I think there were some later James Bond games that sort of generated a bit of
Looks pretty
controversy.
amazing.
7.9 again. I found a video of it on the PS2. I'm going to just quickly look at this. Oh, wow. It looks... Oh, wow. It's a horrific looking third-person shooter with a really horrible looking camera. Great. SpongeBob SquarePants, The Yellow Avenger on the PSP. Always got to have a SpongeBob game. Daxter on the PSP. What happened to Jack? Did he not get... They didn't get him back? His contract expired or something? Mega Man Battle Network 5 Double Team on the DS.
I'm actually a mild fan of the Mega Man Battle Network games.
Yes.
They incorporate this little grid that you move around on in addition to sort of... Well, it's not really JRPG combat, actually. It's really nice. I played a lot of one of the later DS ones. It's really, really good. Just more interesting battles than the normal JRPG stuff. And the Mega Man world's like all right. Like it's quite interesting.
There we go. And the final one is SBK Snowboard Kids on the DS, which we'll consign to the bin. That's enough of that. We catapult ourselves forward in time to the present day, and it's the top 10 UK Steam games. At number 10 is Enter the Gungeon. Talk to me about this.
Yeah, I've been playing this. It's all right. It takes ages to do anything. It's like it's such a slow game. I basically didn't die for the first 2 hours I played it, which is unacceptable for a roguelike. It looks amazing and it's got a lot of nice things about it, but basically it needs a condensed version, which is actually hard. One of the other things about this is it has it's got designed rooms that are randomly put together, which I think we were talking about recently as something that I find pretty lackluster and actually detracts more from a roguelike than I thought it would. Just having the properly randomized areas like Nuclear Throne does. This game really makes Nuclear Throne look a lot better in a lot of ways. It really emphasizes the things that Nuclear Throne does very well.
I'm interested in this now as a genre. Like, if other games are going to have this level of success, something that's very close to Nuclear Throne, then are we going to see a lot more of these?
Yeah, this made me feel really bad for Arson.
Yeah.
Because Starward Rogue is one of these and did absolutely terribly. And, you know, this game looks so good.
Yeah.
And so like games need to look right now if they want to make a lot of money. That I'm slightly wondering whether that's the deal.
Okay.
That it's just... It's so exceptionally good in screenshots.
Yeah.
It's slightly lacking something when I actually play it, but it does look pretty amazing. That was what my guess was for why this was so popular.
Okay. Number 9 is Battlefleet Gothic Armada at 10% off. Number 8 is No Man's Sky in pre-order, which I guess is a good result for their initial pre-order, presumably. I mean, yeah, number 8 on Steam as pre-order is probably fine for that. Number 7 is the Steam controller bundled with Dark Souls 3. Interesting. Are people really going to play Dark Souls 3 with the Steam controller?
Yeah, they made a big deal out of that bundle. I saw it. I was sort of slightly bemused by it. I'm going to be playing Dark Souls 3 later, but on a PlayStation 4.
Okay. Stardew Valley, number 6. Great to see that still hanging around. Darksiders 2.
Definitive edition. Definitive.
I'm going to say no for that. For that.
No from us.
Yeah, that portmanteau.
I'm slightly surprised that Darksiders has the ability to get into the top 5 on a big sale.
Yeah,
actually.
I know, and and twice as well.
Yeah.
Warhammer End Times Vermintide. People keep talking to me about this game. Like, yeah, I know Sean from Smack is a big Vermintide fan.
Yeah, I've been rude about Games Workshop in a lot of places recently, but. They seem to be doing all right with their licensed games. So
yeah, we've got a listener question about that in a minute. Soma at 40% off. Now that's number 3. That's a very good result for that. Frictional said they were pretty disappointed with how it did. Slightly disappointed with how it did, and pointed to some very interesting reasons why they thought that was. The conjunction of sci-fi and horror being a failure as one of them, which was very dubious to me. But it appears that maybe it just didn't quite have the awareness, and now it's bounced back with this sale. Could well be. So well done. We do like Frictional. There's some interesting games. Darksiders again, franchise pack at 90% off at number 2. And number 1 is Dark Souls 3, which I guess is eminently predictable. You're going to play it, aren't you?
Yeah, Dark Souls is actually kind of like really entered the consciousness. It reminds me a bit of what happened with Bethesda's games, actually. Like starting off being quite niche and then rapidly becoming, I think we can call it mainstream now. Dark Souls, which is pretty amazing for what it is.
I know.
It's such a triumph of game design. Like there are some aspects of this genre that I don't like, but that's just the stuff to do with third-person combat. Everything about this, I love. That the way that they have open worlds, but quite small ones that are fully designed. Great. You die all the time. Everything's different. It's really dark. I love everything about these games mechanically. So good.
Good. I need to play some more Bloodborne. I got started with it and I enjoyed it, but I didn't have the staying power. I found it quite exhausting to play.
Yeah, Bloodborne I didn't get with me aesthetically, so I bounced off it a bit. But Dark Souls 2, I really actually managed to get a bit into, and I played Demon Souls 1 a little. I don't generally have enough time to get good at them, but I just love them conceptually, so I keep buying them.
All right, so that's the end of that. And now it's on to a raft of user questions, listener questions that you've sent in on Twitter, which is really nice. So the first one's from Nelson at Video Games in the Bible. And he says, how do you collect and review feedback from a convention? Are there difficulties to getting good feedback in that environment? I think one of the main things that happens when you show a game is that almost everyone has the same problem with it. So looking at Tokyo 42, there's a couple of problems that the developers identified in that game just from watching loads and loads of people play. And as soon as you've seen more than 3 people play, they always struggle in the same place. So the most important things to fix are normally those obvious things, and it's not that hard to keep track of them. In terms of collecting feedback, I saw some different approaches from teams. The Event Zero team, who are really cool, have a significant part of that game is a text parser. So they were recording logs of every single player and looking at where they had problems understanding something or where the AI was not understanding what they were doing. They were going to go home and tune everything based on the logs, which I thought was a really cool idea. For us, we tend to just observe and we tend to focus on like a few specific things. In terms of getting good feedback, it's hard for really complex games like Frozen Synapse because you need someone who has actually sat down and learned how to play the game. But then a lot of the feedback I think that's important to get from them is people's initial impressions, and you can see that fairly easily. So that's my thoughts on it. If you have any
I mean,
there?
For me, I've never found a very good correlation with how good a game is at a show versus how successful it is in the end. So it's just there to get it out there for people to see it and have heard of it, for you to talk to a journalist. It's great if people also enjoy playing it, but people are so seldom in the mood on a show floor to play a Frozen Synapse game. This Res went much better for FS2 than I thought it was going to. People tend to just have no interest in sitting down and moving their little men around. But it was great just because we clearly have a couple of games that people are excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said. There's a certain class of game that does well at shows. I can definitely think of two examples where the game everyone was talking about at the show went on to be massively successful, Joe Danger and Hotline Miami. But they're both games that really suit that environment massively.
Yeah, no, sure, totally. And especially if it's the first time people have been at all introduced to a concept that's great.
Yeah.
They're gonna have a big reaction to it. There are definitely show games, but there are also not show games.
Sure.
And they do fine as well.
Martin Binster Binfield /Mpegasus asks, your feelings on games like Spec Op The Line, in which the moral winning move is not to play.
I don't understand this reference. What does this mean?
So the idea that that you can't, in order to play the game, you have to do something immoral. So levels like, no Russian and that kind of thing.
Oh.
I think it can be okay. I think it can be interesting. One of the problems with it is that the idea of kind of flagging up the player's lack of agency in terms of making moral decisions now just makes your game look bad. It's not like an interesting constraint that games have in general. So if you're making the point, hey, you're trapped into this thing that you can't do anything about, that's a bit trite. And it's something I did in Frozen Synapse 1, and it now looks trite. So I'm not really going to do that again. I still think it can be okay. I think that I like morally ambiguous player factions. I don't like sort of massively ham-fisted stuff, which I think there is some of in Spec Ops The Line, and certainly, is in No Russian, where you're just forced to do something amazingly terrible, and then the game kind of chastises you for being bad. I don't think that's interesting anymore. But I think you can make the player do ambiguous stuff and have it be interesting.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of waiting for that to happen. Like, it feels like, people put stuff like No Russian in games just because it gets headlines, and it's really kind of sort of morally just vacant in a lot of ways. It's just a silly PR stunt. I'm trying to remember. It's so rare that I really buy into a game's internal world to the extent that I feel morally dubious about doing anything within it.
Right.
So the next time I see something really make me question my morals of doing a thing in a computer game will probably be the first.
I think there's some stuff in some Bethesda games, some of the more interesting quests, I think, do present you with interesting moral choices, but he's really talking about things, you have to kind of opt out or you wish you could opt out. So yeah, it is difficult. I think that structure is so innately lacking in nuance that it's very hard for it to say something interesting, is what I would say there. Right, a hamster asks, if you were to make a VR game, what would the gimmick be? Do you have any?
I do. This is stolen from, I think, Visiting the Village pub correspondent Adam Hunt, who he came up with a great idea, which is called Ghost Punch, where someone puts on a VR helmet, and everyone else punches them.
Let me recover. Okay, tell me about Ghost Punch. Ghost Punch.
So yeah, you're in a VR helmet. You can't see anyone, but all the other people in the room are punching you. So good.
Okay, good. Vindemon asks, tell us more about Tokyo 42. Which role is Mode 7 playing in the project? Is it made by two teams? So we're publishing the game, and it's made by Smack Games, who are two amazing brothers, Sean Wright and Maciek Strakowski. And what we're doing is basically sort of all of the traditional publisher roles. So we're funding the game. We're also doing all the marketing and PR for the game. We're organizing the ports of the game, should we decide to do ports. No platforms have yet been announced. We're working on some design stuff with them. We're generally helping them with scheduling, milestones, and that kind of thing. And we're sort of supporting them with whatever they need. So we're a very, very, very involved publisher. We're only working on their game at the moment. And they're doing everything else. So Maciek is the artist and designer, and Sean is the programmer, and he also contributes to design as well. And they're producing this amazing thing, which has just kind of blown up hugely since we announced it, and people have been very excited about it. So it's very cool.
Yep, it's absolutely awesome. I think you've covered everything that we're doing on it.
Yep.
We know about really boring things like how to finish a game
and
how to focus on which bit of the controls aren't working.
Yep.
So we're not sitting here saying that we're responsible for all the amazing looking cats.
No.
But we try and get involved on the little things that sometimes you need experience for. But these guys know what they're doing.
They really do. They really do.
And we are completely over the moon about being in on it with them.
Yeah, no, it's been really exciting working with them, and as I've been saying to people, they take feedback really well, and it really feels like a proper collaboration between us and them, which is great. So we're very happy about that, and we'll be showing more of that game pretty soon, I think. Alex Connolly has a question, and he says, "Is this the golden age of Games Workshop licensing?" What do you think?
Well, I guess you'd have to say it is, although I have a soft spot for Shadow of the Horned Rat. What else would there even be? I mean, Dawn of War was pretty great. You know, there are just so many games. They've managed to foster 100 different licensed games, and some of them are pretty good. I mean, a lot of games are good at the moment. The quality of games that are being released is massively shooting through the roof for me. A lot of games that I don't particularly like, but are very competent, and that's not sort of how it was a few years ago. So we're seeing that there's a lot more juice in the IP than I kind of thought there still was. And there you go.
I think the thing I really like about what they do is that they're really letting people use anything. So one of the interesting games at Rezzed was Man O' War, which is a sailing game, but in the Games Workshop universe. So it's a sailing game with like megalodons and orcs and crazy sharks and stuff. And that's really cool. Like to have a ship-based combat game where you have this weird fantasy stuff, that actually made me interested in potentially playing a ship-based combat game. So I think things like that can really work.
I remember that game when it came out, the board game version, a long time ago, and there was something really exciting about it. Because you're right, it's nice when they decide to do something gadget.
Yes.
Yeah. Games Workshop.
So yeah, it would be. I hope the teams who are doing those games are getting a good deal. Is the only thing I can say there. But yes, probably is a golden age. Mia Dragovic, nice to have you back. Sir says, can a game genre type become globally easier the more players understand it? Example in the next tweet, which is Souls games were initially hard, but they had an approach people didn't understand. The approach stayed the same over the series, but people claim it's gotten easier. This is an interesting one. I think there are some genre expectations which get carried through. I mean, I think certainly FPSs had this where people would struggle with the controls a lot, and then they grew and they'd be expected to just do the normal FPS controls, but also manage loads of other stuff. So I think genre awareness and transferable skills from other games do have an impact. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. As soon as if you played one Souls game, it's gonna feel very different the next time you play it. It's just about experience.
Yeah.
There's nothing harder, I think, really, than a completely new genre, especially one that's about explicitly being hard. So, again, this is kind of about the fact that you never have your first time again, and it's great when you have your first time playing a Souls game, and you never quite recapture that because it's not your first time anymore.
So I think there's something interesting here with Hyper Light Drifter as well, which is that style of combat that's sort of almost like slightly Zelda-ish combat where you have to dodge a lot, you have to be very specific timing your attacks. That's a skill which is true in a lot of games, and I feel like some of the people criticizing Hyper Light Drifter just are not good at that. Like, I'm happy to criticize some of the things about it that I don't feel are as strong design-wise, but the difficulty of the combat for me is not really one of those things. It's like it either gels with you and you have the experience, or you don't, and you have to learn how to get better at it. Similarly, Nuclear Throne, I think a lot of people bounce off that because it's pretty hard. So we do require certain levels of literacy for certain genres now, and I think that's a good thing.
Fair enough.
Good. That's the end of that. Thank you very much for joining us once again. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm Mode7Games, and he's Ian Hardingham, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.